This is where cultivation excellence meets unfiltered insight. AROYA Office Hours, Special Edition. I'm Greg Dunaway, taking you through the innovations and ideas that are shaping our global industry. Powered by AROYA's revolutionary approach to data-driven growing, we're going to bring you the brightest minds behind today's biggest breakthroughs. From cutting-edge solutions to market strategy, stay ahead in this rapidly evolving landscape. Welcome back to Office Hours Live Special Edition. My name is Greg Dunaway. I'm so stoked you're here because today we have an incredible guest. My friend Jamie Pearson is with us. She's just back from ICBC Berlin and some international investment forums. I caught her on just as she landed. I'm so glad she's here. Jamie used to be the CEO of Bang Chocolate. She expanded them worldwide. She's got 25 years of experience in international real estate and cannabis. And now under the new Holland Group, she guides businesses across the world, internationally, domestically, raising capital, just trying to find a way to navigate in this crazy world we call cannabis. She has been named the International Woman of the Year. Enough of the accolades. Jamie, I am so glad you're here.
Happy to be here.
One of the things that I always wanted to get lost in the discussion about all your achievements is the fact that there are, as you know, a deficit of women in leadership positions, and I would love for you to share just a quick bio for people to understand how you were able to achieve so much and get put in some positions that were arguably the deck was stacked a little against you. If you don't mind sharing a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. I think the most salient point of my journey was that I came reluctantly into the cannabis industry and have a dad who's been cultivating. I'm 55. He's been cultivating 57 years now. He's got PTSD from Vietnam and has never drank alcohol. He's always used cannabis my entire life. And 50 years ago, it was really hard to come by. So he just learned how to grow his own. And that was during the war on drugs. And I thought my dad was, I always adored him. He's amazing. He's a great guy. But it was tough being a kid growing up with the dad who, bartered with pot for, construction work or whatever it was. So we would always have people coming over to our house. And I just learned from an early age what I could and couldn't talk about. And so it wasn't that I was anti-cannabis. It was that cannabis always had that stigma that we all know and experience. And I just really didn't want to be about it. So I was in real estate investing for a long time. And it was really my cousin, DJ Muggs from Cypress Hill, when Cypress started getting a lot of offers as cannabis started legalizing across the United States. He and I had been investing in real estate together, and he's like, help me find the band a good weed deal. And I just didn't know anything about it, didn't know much about the industry, and really wasn't all that interested in, becoming queen stoner or anything. Like none of that appealed to me. But I would do anything for Muggs. And, so I was like, look, I'll explore it. And it was a way to go do something new, and it was interesting. And the more I got into it, the more I realized the people are amazing. And I just have always sort of had a charmed life in the sense that I think if your currency is kindness, it takes you far. And I believe that the world's abundant. I believe there are more opportunities than there is time and money. And I'm not afraid to share anything that comes my way or give someone the shirt off my back if they love it. Because ultimately, my mom's always taught me that people are more important than things and that there's always enough. And so the way I got into cannabis was with that mindset, and it helped that I had already built a business doing real estate investing, amassing a bunch of rentals and a property management company. So I had enough passive income coming in that I was never desperate to make cannabis be everything for me. So I think I was able to just be relaxed and kind and, try to welcome everybody into my world. And it served me well. And so what ended up happening with Bang is that when I took over Bang was because the guy that started Bang, or, the two co-founders, one of them had exited into a nice deal that with a company that ended up being Cresco, and the other one stayed on. And then after he took Bang public, he just realized that running a public company wasn't for him. And the board asked me to step in, right place, right time, I guess you would say, or wrong place, wrong time, depending on how you look at it. Because Bang was, again, when I got into the leadership role, there was a private equity company that basically had Bang by the short hairs, and there was nothing anyone was going to be able to do. What I was able to do with them was negotiate a little bit more breathing room from underneath the debt that they were holding over our head. And, I was able to get a lot of things done while I was there. But ultimately, when you've got a guy pumping and dumping in the background, and that's just not the way I want to do business, it wasn't ultimately going to be a good fit. And those decisions and those cards had been played long before I ever showed up. But I really believed in the product. I believed in the brand. I brought Muggs in, he helped me with it, and a bunch of his friends helped me with it. And we could have done something much, much bigger and better with it had we not already sold our soul to the devil, so to speak. And, and everyone asks me, like, is Bang still around? And the truth is, they don't speak to me. I have no idea what's going on with Bang. They shut off my email and, treated me like I was persona non grata. And, I just have that kind of mentality that, like, I never signed contracts with New Holland Group for 1 year, 6 months, 3 months. They're always month to month. If you like me, you want to work with me, and you're getting value, and I'm doing something that makes you happy, we stay in business together. And if for whatever reason you're not happy, cut me loose. Because I think ultimately that's the way I always want to be in business. I want to be providing value more than what I promise. And so that's kind of, I think, a combination of all of that is how I ended up where I'm at.
And talk a little bit about, Jamie, because it's so interesting. Your work at New Holland can kind of run the gamut in terms of how you advise and what you do. If you just don't mind level setting for everyone, like, what does New Holland do? Who might seek you out?
Definitely companies and brands that are trying to cross borders. I definitely, for 7 years at Bang, I kissed frogs, I say. I went into different markets and figured out, who were the players that were serious, who were the players that were serious about, being in the clandestine market. And I think having a combination of those types of Rolodexes is important, because the roots and the suits must work together and do work together. Ultimately, when you talk about the genetics that proliferate, it's always going to be the roots that are in the background, kind of controlling what's happening on the streets, so to speak. And that's what dictates what happens in retail. So I think kissing frogs out in the world, helping people tap my Rolodex so that they can cross borders, understanding the nuances of which agencies are actually in control, because it's not always what it looks to be on the surface. I do a lot of coaching of teams. So it never starts that way, but what happens a lot is companies will bring me in for strategy. So usually it's expansion strategy. How do we take what we've built and move it to another market, another state, another nation, whatever it is? And as we start doing the strategy, what usually ends up happening is, I just end up helping them CEO from an outside looking in perspective, which is super valuable. Wish I had that when I was running Bang. In fact, I did have some friends that were CEOs that were, helping me in the background, but do a lot of that type of work. I picked up a cold in London and I'm just getting over it.
It happens. You're only gone for what, like 4 or 5 weeks?
Yeah, I try if I'm going to do that, 8-hour time difference, I try to be over there for a while so that I'm not having to do jet lag 2 times in too short of a period of time, because that's what ends up getting you sick. So
Yeah. Well, I First off, I love that, and I think there's a lot of people listening who would really benefit from a chat with you. And I hope that if there's no other takeaway, if you are someone in a C-suite ownership position, ask me for Jamie's number. But I do want to get into a couple key topics that you have really unique insight into. When you're looking at the U.S. market, luckily, I'm sure you get a lot of companies that are doing well and saying, "Hey, Jamie, we want to expand," but also there are a lot of challenges out in the U.S. market. What are you seeing, and what are some of the people from your high-level C-suite seeing in the U.S. market right now?
So, case in point on that, I was the moderator of the international panel at the ICBC Berlin, and had a guy that runs the largest pharmaceutical manufacturing company out of Portugal that's producing products into the German market. A lot of those products start as flower that comes out of Canada. So we're a couple of Canadian producers. And one of the things that happened in that conversation that we had was, if you're going to skate to where the puck is going, for example, and we use the US market as our benchmark, what you can predict is that price compression is effectively, it's going to happen. It is a race to the bottom, because what always happens is a country will legalize. They will under anticipate always what is the demand going to be. The demand's always way bigger than what they think, because they're basing it on people that are communicating to a government how much cannabis they use, how often they use it. There's a lot of people that use cannabis that just are not going to give the government that information. So they're always seeing a fraction of what actually exists when they're doing those types of studies. And then, how do you measure the illicit market? How do you measure how much cannabis is actually going into any one illicit market? Because, some of that has to do with what's seized. Some of that has to do with who is arrested. Some of that just basically has to do with intake when they go into treatment. These are inexact sciences that you're going to extrapolate your data from. So they legalize. The demand is much higher than they anticipate. And then what happens is they go, "Oh, wow, we got our first batch of tax revenue. We like this. We need more of this." And then they open up the floodgates, and then you have an oversupply. And then people start selling, undercutting each other because they need to get that cash in the door. Because PS, by the way, as we all know, investment money is hard to come by. No matter, even in Germany, where cannabis has been federally legalized, investment money in banking is still an issue, because the US is the banking tail that's wagging the dog. So everyone's trying to steer clear of getting in trouble with that correspondent banking when you're using the wire system. So you end up having mass amounts of supply, mass amounts of demand, and that ends up compressing prices. So you see in the most mature markets in the US, the price per pound is significantly lower than the new markets. And so that's predictable. So what the big players do is they get themselves to a place where they can produce at a price point that nobody else can compete with. And so I would say, if you're a mom and pop grower, grab that cash while you can, but know that that price is going to go down. So anywhere that you can achieve a better margin when you're growing, or when you're selling, or when you're branding, that's going to be critical. So a lot of the things that I help companies do is just figure out ways to achieve that extra margin in ways that they maybe haven't thought of. And a lot of that is just being smart in negotiating your contracts so that you can benefit from the economy of scale.
And it's funny, as you know, I am in the mom and pop grow with Colt and everything. So it's watching it, even in an arguably healthy market like Arizona. Everything you said is absolutely brutal right now. And so one of the other questions, what's that?
It's not going to get better.
Not going to get better. No, you better carve your niche out, and you better know it. When you said something really interesting. You said, investment dollars are hard to come by. I know you work on investment. Are there exceptions to those rules, Jamie? Are there U.S. companies that you've found that are investable? And what's kind of maybe the what are you seeing like the through line between companies that you would say are investable?
It's funny. I always, when I'm working with clients, it's another thing that New Holland does is we help companies raise money. And we don't go out and solicit the dollars themselves. But what and we do make those introductions, where it makes sense. But what we make sure of is that their pitch deck and that their pitch makes sense. Because, if you come in and you're like, I've got the new, the better mousetrap, and I'm going to make 50 cents a unit. And then we say, well, what's your, how much money are you raising? I'm raising $5 million, and I'll give you 20% of my company. And you're like, okay, so your company's worth $20 million, and how much revenue do you have? 0, but I've got this better mousetrap. I think that's what Cannabis 1.0 was when cannabis started legalizing, companies started going public. It was Wild West because it wasn't like you had comps and it wasn't like there was examples. So we were all just trying to figure out what was happening, and pounds were selling for $3,000.
I wish.
That existed back in the day. And then as prices started to go down, the good indoor craft weed would still sell for $2,000 a pound, and in some cases it still does. But that's not the norm. And believe me, that's after somebody has created a strain that people are willing to step up and pay for. Most of it is a commodity, and it's this it's a dime a dozen. There's good weed everywhere in the United States. And I noticed that when I'm in Europe, and the good weed's really hard to come by. So I think at the end of the day, if you're the opposite of that, and if you have a better mousetrap and you have a great team and you've got revenue and you've got demand and you can prove that your growth trajectory is a no-brainer, well, investors will take that hypothesis all day long. Where your valuation is set as at a win-win, where you're like, I'm raising $1 million on a $5 million valuation, and I just did $5 million of revenue, and you want a 1x revenue type of deal, and you give an investor a 20% discount because you recognize that money that pours fuel on your fire, it represents your ability to hockey stick your growth rather than trying to limp along bootstrapped. So when you come in and you view your investor as a partner, and you make sure that there's value in it for the investors come out of the woodwork.
I love it. It is interesting too, because one of the things you said about revenue is, and I'm sure there's people who are listening to this who are going to be like, you know what? I'm pre-revenue, and I think kind of the lesson here, the tough lesson is, if you're pre-revenue, you're looking at a friends and family raise right now. It just is what it is until you can get to a place where you can show some numbers, put up some numbers.
You know what? And not necessarily. I'll give you one example. I'm helping a company raise money right now. I can't talk, too much in specifics, but they have a patented product. The patents are worth some money.
There we go. Yeah.
Obviously, they went through the double-blind, 3-phase clinical trials, and they know for a fact that their product works. They also have LOIs in place from companies that will buy this product the minute it's manufactured, and they're buying it at a really high margin. This company's got high margins. And so now you've got your pre-revenue, but your mousetrap is proven, and it's proven because you've got purchase orders. Now I am pre-revenue, but I can go to investors, and they understand this guy built a business, got his patents, has his LOIs in place. I put in a chunk of capital, and the next thing that happens is we're off to the races. So you can even raise money in a pre-revenue environment if you have all your ducks in a row and there's little risk to the investor now. And I think that's the piece there, is that in North America, a lot of investors have lost a lot of money in cannabis. And a lot of it isn't that you've got bad apples or bad operators. A lot of it is sometimes we were anticipating safe banking was going to pass. How many times have we heard, oh, this year safe banking is going to pass? We have not had legislative support in any way, shape, or form. They just want to tax us to death, tax us out of existence, essentially, because they're holding their nose to have the legal market, because everyone's afraid that the feds are going to come in, shut down their banking, and we've all had that happen. So these are legitimate fears, but all these investors that lost money need to take a step back, look in the mirror and say, I got greedy, because there was no due diligence. You couldn't do due diligence on some of these things. You were literally blazing a trail. And so I think there needs to be, while the investors are licking their wounds, they also need to take some of the accountability onto their own shoulders, because I do think that part of why everyone lost so much money is everyone was greedy.
I love it. I love it. And also that is a great counterpoint to what I brought up about companies pre-revenue, because I know a lot of people who are going to be listening to this, are probably in that stage of pre-revenue and looking for ways to tell that story. One of the other questions,
that's what it is, Greg. It's storytelling, and the investor needs to be led down the path to where, first of all, your fundamentals have to be in place. Good product, good team, good hypothesis. If you're solving a problem, the solution has to actually solve a problem. And what I'll tell you, the kiss of death is if you have to educate consumers that they need to know they need your product, and you've got to teach them that's tough in this day and age. So, you've got to be in a niche where there's actually money to be made, and that it's easy to connect the dots. You tell that story in a succinct way, you can raise money.
That is awesome. Even in a compressed market, people listen to this. Jamie Pearson is telling you there is money to be had. There is hope there's light at the end of that tunnel for all you entrepreneurs out there. I want to pivot a little bit, because you also have the unique ability to tell us about the similarities and differences in what you're seeing in the EU and specifically German markets. And just so people know, Jamie, not only was she giving keynotes at ICBC Berlin, think a smaller version of MJ BizCon in Berlin, she also was emceeing a much more private event. And to the extent that, Jamie, you're willing to tell us a little bit about that private investor event, I think that would be very fascinating for us.
Sure. Talman House is an organization that connects entrepreneurs who are raising money with investors. They get investors to join the Talman House. The individual membership's $3,500. The corporate membership is $5,000. And that allows you entree into the room. And as an investor, the reason you want to be in the room is you're in the room with other investors. So if you've already got portfolio companies that you are seeking investment for, then you're in a room full of like-minded people who are investing in cannabis. Many of those investors are family offices, high net worth individuals, private equity firms, little bit of VC money. We're starting to see VCs change in nature right now. Some of them are their thesis, like Artemis Growth Partners, they only invest in cannabis, but the majority of these investors that are in the room have earmarked money for either high risk or for cannabis specifically because they view it as a wellness play, or however that thesis fits into their investment approach. You've got a whole bunch of people in the room. So in Berlin, we had about 150 investors in the room. One of the things that they do is they do not allow solicitation. So they're not letting, the insurance salesman join, write the $3,500 check, and then just go blast everybody trying to sell insurance. It is very serious, an investor meeting only. And then they have pitch contests. And the 4 companies that pitched, I've emceed now 3 of these events. And in all 3 of the events, companies that have pitched have gotten funded right out of pitching at that event. Now, one thing that we do is Talman Group hired New Holland Group to train the people that are pitching. Now, some of these people, one of the companies they've done over 2,000 pitches to investors, and that's fine. You're experienced company out raising money. That's one thing. But when we are coaching you, we're coaching you for our event because we know who's coming before you, who's coming after you, what needs to be said, what needs to be left out, what you want to have in your data room. And so what happens when those companies are pitching, they become Talman portfolio companies. And Talman has an app and everyone's communicating with each other on the app. And it's this robust environment around investment in the cannabis space. The cool thing about Talman, all that's cool. And it's a really fun group to be in because it's exciting when you see companies getting funded. And these are, we probably sorted through 40 or 50 pitches and narrowed it down to 4 companies because we really only want investable companies pitching. And these companies are jumping into the European market with some really groundbreaking offerings to investors, because what they have that everyone didn't have in the US is the benefit of the US experience and the benefit of the 20 years that everybody's been doing cannabis in the US. So now you've got people sort of cannabis 2.0 recognizing, what not to do and what to do. And the pitches are getting better and better, and the companies are getting smarter and smarter. And it's interesting to see how quickly the industry has evolved in the last 10, 20 years. So what I will say lastly is that the difference between the markets is something that we can touch on if you have specific questions about it. But it is a very different cannabis market in Europe, and you really have to take your American lens off, which is hard to do. The Americans in the room were asking basic questions like, what is GACP? What is EU GMP? What do those things mean? And you really have to have an understanding of the European market if you want to play in that playground.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like you and I are very lucky in the sense that I've been able to go over and hang out with you and learn from you. And one of the things I think shouldn't be lost on people is the way that they can kind of view legalization, right? Or the framework for legalization can vary very, very deeply or very, 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 very significantly between country to country. Everyone is excited about Germany right now, right? Everyone's excited. Let's touch on real quick for some people who might be listening. Maybe they're cultivators, maybe they're equipment vendors, maybe they're just someone who loves cannabis. What are people excited about from Germany? And then we can kind of pivot from there. What's exciting about Germany right now, Jamie?
Well, I think let's just talk basics.
Yeah.
I live in Montana. Okay. Montana is bigger than Germany. So when you think about Germany, it's about, call it the size of Oregon. I might be off a little bit, but it's probably maybe a little bit bigger than the state of Oregon.
Close enough.
There's 82 to 85 million people in that small space. And there's an infrastructure of transportation. There's, planes, trains, automobiles. It's easy to get from one spot to another in Europe. So it's very compact and very densely populated. So if you are thinking about being in cannabis, when people are trying to conquer the country of Germany, I'm always like, wait, take a step back. What would you be doing if you were conquering the state of Oregon? In terms of logistics, like at Bang, we struggled in California. When you think about the type of purchaser in San Francisco and the type of purchaser in LA or San Diego, not the same. But you got to drive 7 hours. I would have a salesperson having to drive 7 hours from LA to San Francisco and then have to speak a completely different language, cannabis language, because of the things that mattered in San Francisco weren't the things that mattered in Los Angeles. The swag was different. Everything was different. And so California is a gigantic landmass. Germany's not a gigantic landmass. And while there are regional differences, they're speaking dialects in the South versus in the North. And, you've got the Berlin history with the Berlin Wall and Eastern East Berlin and Eastern Germany. You have all of that history that's different than if you're over in Western Germany, where you've got your industrial area. Though the areas are different, just like what we have here. You just don't have to travel as far, and they are incorporating cannabis into their medical program. In the US, another just basic blocking and tackling in the US, medical, we put air quotes around, and it's a parallel system that allows people to get access to cannabis under the guise, not guise, but under the premise that I'm using cannabis for something medical. So in many cases, that's true. Using it to sleep or to relax or whatever you're using it for, not just as a social lubricant. But in Germany, it's part of their healthcare system. You go to the doctor, you get a prescription, you go to the pharmacy, get it filled, and the insurance covers it. Healthcare system. You're getting cannabis the same way you're getting antibiotics. That means that the government's paying for your cannabis in those circumstances. That's not always true. There are qualifying conditions and not qualifying conditions, but we don't even have that option here in the US.
Right.
So that's one of the things. I think if you're in the cannabis world, you got to remember that the real cannabis world in Germany is pharma. It's not just medical. So you have to have good manufacturing practices and certifications, and jumping in requires very specified training, licensing, expensive grows. Now, after I've been in all the EU GMP grows in Europe, I come into grows in the US. Many of them don't have you suit up. They don't have you in walk-off mats. You're bringing whatever pests in from the outside. And then I know it's amateur hour, and then I have all these people that will have me tour their grow, and they're like, isn't it great? And I'm like, all right, it's good. We have some of that GMP type grows. I've been in many of them in the US. I don't want to throw shade on all US growers. But I will say pharmaceutical growing is different than medical growing in the US for sure.
Yeah, and I guess one question to follow up on that was, between your time at ICBC and your time at Talman this year, what either surprised you, or what was your big takeaway from this year? What did you leave with? Because again, it's such a gathering of people from across the world. What kind of was your takeaway for 2025?
There's just a ton of opportunity. One example, in the medical market, reported to the government, 10% of Germans reported to the government that they use cannabis.
Wow.
Doing that math, that's 8.2 million people. But there were only 700,000 people in the medical system last year. So that's a big gap of opportunity. And part of it is pulling these cannabis users out of the illicit market and into the legal market. The part that I think's crazy is that the legal pharmaceutical cannabis in Germany is less than the illicit market. It costs less money. Why? I mean, it's hard to fathom, because in America, all of the illicit market undercuts the legal market, because they don't have to lab test, they don't have to pay taxes and all of that. So you automatically think you're at a disadvantage. But what the German government did that was really smart is they allowed and actually required import. In the very beginning of the German program, you weren't allowed to cultivate. There were only a handful of companies that were given cultivation licenses in country because they were trying to conserve power. The war in Ukraine put a big damper on Germany's ability to access oil. And that made powering Germany, keeping the lights on, literally an issue. So they weren't going to add to that burden by legalizing a bunch of indoor grows. So they set up an import system. Well, now you've got people importing cannabis from places like Costa Rica and Colombia, where their ability to grow quality cannabis at sub 50 cents a gram, nobody can compete with them. But they come in and undercut the illicit market. And it's an example of a way that you can do that. You can eliminate your illicit market. It's really tough to be a drug dealer in Germany right now if your only drug is cannabis.
I think I gotta diversify.
Yeah.
No, I'm just teasing.
That market's still thriving right now because a lot of people haven't entered into the medical market. And big reason for that is not everybody wants to let the government in on their business. So there is still an illicit market, but I think those social clubs are going to be definitely an answer for that.
Yeah, and we should add that Jamie and we're going to offhand mention social clubs here, but pick up the phone and call Jamie or bug us on LinkedIn. We can explain a little more for you. The gist of it is, social clubs are a very, I would call it, limited way for there to be adult rec in Germany as well, a parallel track. And I know, Jamie, your time is very valuable. So I have a few more things I want to talk about. If you want to ask about social clubs, call one of us. One thing that I'm very curious about from your perspective is there is a raging debate in the United States about hemp versus THC right now. And I know. So look, let me put my biases on the table for everybody. I am a craft cultivator. Part of what I do is craft cultivation here in Arizona. My perspective on hemp is probably vastly different from a lot of others. Like, the fact that you can order, THC across state lines is not a great thing for my business. However, I'm also of the mindset, and I'm curious where you fall on this, that the more we can normalize cannabis, the better it is for everybody. So there's a lot going on, Jimmy. What are you seeing on this hemp versus THC? Where are you falling? What are you seeing?
I'm doing a lot of work with hemp beverages, and this is one of them. I love this product, by the way.
Oh, cool.
I really, really bullish on hemp beverage. I've got 2 kids who are Gen Zers that don't drink alcohol. I think that's definitely a trend. We're starting to see the hemp beverages crush in the alternative to alcohol market. And I think it's where we're headed. And I'm with you. I do believe it's the same plant. I believe what we're all fighting for is adults to have access to the plant, to the miracles of the plant. And so if you have figured out how to exploit the farm bill loophole, God bless you.
God bless you.
And I understand the cannabis part. It's very similar in Montana. We have a similar debate where people go out and they spend $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million to get a liquor license in Montana. And with a liquor license, you can often get a gambling license because we've got legal gambling here. We got card rooms, people playing poker. We got machine, all that stuff. We got a casino on every corner here in Billings. Then all of a sudden, the craft brewers popped up out of everywhere and started having these microbreweries. And the liquor license people were like, hey, wait a second. I paid $5 million for my license and you're letting them cannibalize my customer. Now my customers are all going to drink that beer and they're not coming to my bar or my restaurant. And there became a battle. And what the state of Montana did, and we're one of those weird states where the only place you can buy liquor is at a state-run liquor store. They don't sell liquor anywhere. You can just get beer and wine in grocery stores, but not liquor. They were like, okay, you're right. So microbreweries can only be open till 8 p.m. And they could only sell you, at the beginning, it was like they could only sell you 2 beers and you had to have a wristband and it was a whole thing. And they were saying to the liquor license holders, hey, we get it. You forked over $5 million for your license. We're going to curtail the amount that we allow these craft breweries, to operate as retail establishments. But understand, they're bringing jobs. They're brewing good beer. We're winning gold medals all over the brewers in Billings. This is an industry. It's a cottage industry. We're gonna let people make money from it, but this is how we're gonna do the balancing act. What's happening in cannabis is you've got these cannabis people that have spent $2, $3, $4, $5 million for their licenses. They're jumping through these massive hoops, paying stupid taxes, doing all this lab testing, metric, BioTrack. It's a hoop jumping exercise extraordinaire. And then hemp comes in just like these microbreweries, and they're shipping you joints through the US mail, which I love, by the way.
I'd
Love
love
that.
to do it too.
And the way I've understood it is I didn't come up with this, and I don't know who did, but I like it. And it's that all bananas turn yellow when they're ripe, and they all start as green. But in cannabis, the banana has to be yellow when you test it. And in hemp, it can be green when you test it. And when the banana is yellow, it's cannabis. When the banana is green, it's hemp. And you are allowed to test your THCA flower up to 30 days before you harvest. It's always going to be a green banana when your COA test is captured when the banana is green. And then the banana will apparently turn yellow and you've got cannabis, but because your COA says it's hemp, you're off to the races. I'm like, I don't care if you paid $5 million for your cannabis license. How's that working for you? If you're not making money and you're doing this gigantic hemp jumping exercise, parallel process. Rather than try to crab pot them down back into the boiling water, why don't you lift them up and freaking join them? That's what I'm thinking. Why don't we join forces and recognize we have legal THC in the US right now, but we're fighting to get rid of it? That makes no fucking sense. Excuse me.
Your language is just fine. I actually initially I was very like, oh shit, these guys are gonna leapfrog us. But in the end, I think rising tides, and again, to the extent that the legislation could come together to be benefit everybody would be great. God only knows. I'm not hopeful about that in DC, but
and I know that the yeah but sentiment out there is yeah, but all these synthetic compounds and things like that. Look, there's a lot of really smart PhDs out there that are better able to have that conversation. I am talking strictly about the THCA flower, the Delta 9 cannabis.
Right.
I'm not talking about HHC and all that other stuff.
No, we're not. No.
And I'm not an expert in it, and I'm not going to weigh in on it. I do know that, everyone's like, well, what about the children? And what about I'm like, what about opiates? And what about tobacco? What about alcohol? Everyone's doing what they want to do as adults. I'm saying, what about the adults that want to make different decisions? And we're going to protect them from the plant. That's the stuff I don't like.
I hear you. Jamie, I want to close us out with you and I doing a little exercise together. I think it'll be really cool for people, which is when you look at, let's say I know on this podcast, we get a ton of cultivators, a ton of operators. When you look at the next 5 to 7 years, I'd love to go out on a hopeful note. We know it's going to be compressed. Let's say that you are giving just for today, you were giving some free New Holland advice for some of our domestic operators and domestic cultivators. What do you want to say about the next 3 to 5 years? What should they be focused on?
Quality, margin. Period. If you can grow high quality cannabis and have a high margin with it, you can get your costs down. You can be competitive forever.
I love it. And for all those people, same exercise. There's probably some people, Jamie, this may be their first time understanding what the international market could be. What are some good first steps that people who are either operators, even cultivators, or just those ancillary businesses like equipment, what are some good first steps they can see how they may fit into the puzzle that is international cannabis?
I mean, I think what you have to do is show up. You got to meet the people. You got to ask the questions. It is, when they say that your network is your net worth. If you want to dive into a market, do a little bit of research ahead of time. Find out people that are operating in that market. Talk to people that are operating in that market, and then go get in the market and meet people. And the reality is, this has been my experience. Cannabis people around the world have a few things in common, and one of them I have found is an open-heartedness that maybe comes from being a cannabis user. I just think there's a lot of empathy and a lot of come along for the ride spirit. And so if you go in knowing that you're not going to be encountered with the who moved my cheese and why are you asking, you're just not going to get that. People are so friendly in the international markets. And if you come in and really do your research and meet the people, you got to get into the flow and, flow, not force, and follow the flow in the world, that the way you interact with the world in America, you can interact with the world the same way in international, but you got to come in and be a little bit respectful too. I will say one of the things I do notice is that, if people are like, well, I'm a cultivator from California, or I'm a cultivator from Arizona. I've been growing good weed for 20 years. And that might be true, and you might be awesome, but you probably have a lot to learn about that culture, how those growers think, what strains, the consumers in that environment have a taste for. And if you go in with an open heart yourself, the exchange of energy is usually pretty magical.
I love ending on a magical note. Jamie, you and I could talk for hours about just the things that we lightly touched on today.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're busy. I know you're just back from international travel. Thank you so much for the time today. Absolutely loved every second of it. I really appreciate you being here.
You're the best, Greg. Anytime.
Awesome. Thanks again.